Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We're currently involved in the study of the feast days of Israel. Right now, we are focused on the Day of Atonement, otherwise known as Yom Kippur. All right? And when we come to discussing the elements of pardon me, I talked a lot over the weekend. Really did. And I was out in the heat and what have you, so my voice is pretty weak today. Anyway, when we come to the Day of Atonement, focus is generally made on the two goats. You have what is known as the scapegoat, also called Azazel. That word Azazel is absolutely fascinating. It appears four times in Leviticus chapter 16, nowhere else in Scripture that I'm aware of. There is tremendous controversy over the exact meaning of Azazel. Some believe that it has to do with the belief that the wilderness was the arena, was the residence of demons, of all sorts of demonic spirits. Well, one of the two goats on the day of Yom Kippur, the one called Azazel, here's what happened. And what we're looking at here, by the way, is we're focusing on the substitutionary aspect of the Day of Atonement. It doesn't get much more important than this, ladies and gentlemen. So Azazel, lots were cast. We might say that, well, they threw the dice. And one of them was chosen to be the true scapegoat. He is called Azazel. Now, why is that true? Well, because on the Day of Atonement, when the lots were cast, and you have Azazel set aside over here, and you have the other goat set aside over here. This other goat, not Azazel, this was the goat, quote, for the Lord, unquote. Azazel was brought before the high priest, and the high priest laid his hands on Azazel, prayed over him, and confessed all of the sins of the nation. That could get long, couldn't it? But this symbolic action was to transfer, to convey the nation's sins onto this scapegoat. And this scapegoat was then handed over to, the sources say something like an appropriate person. They were supposed to be a ritually pure person. I don't know what else was said. I don't know what else it meant by an appropriate person. Never found any detail on that. Anyway, the goat was handed over to this individual who then took this Azazel goat out into the wilderness. Now remember, Azazel seems to have some linkage with that concept of sin and demonic activity and what have you. And again, a whole lot of it's speculation because they just don't know. The Mishnah talks about it and leaves lots and lots of gaps in our understanding of it. But anyway, this individual took Azazel out into the wilderness. Now, Leviticus chapter 16 says, turned it loose. The whole point being that here is this goat that is bearing all the sins of the people. And those sins, again, have been placed on that goat, he is now bearing the sin of the people, of the nation. He is taken into the wilderness and he is released. Thus, sin is being removed. Now, it's interesting that the Mishnah says this individual, this duly qualified individual, this appropriate person, the Mishnah says that this individual would take this goat out to an appointed bluff, cliff, whatever, and would throw that Azazel goat off of the bluff, killing it. Well, that was a tradition, but Leviticus chapter 16 doesn't say that. Leviticus 23 does not say that. All that Leviticus chapter 16 does is say, you take Azazel out into the wilderness and you let him go. You release him there. Now, the picture obviously is a very powerful one. If all the sins of the nation have been conferred onto the head of this goat, this is a substitutionary action. Now, again, it's interesting to me that the Mishnah says, well, he was taken out there and killed. No documentation. Then, however, you have the goat that is, quote, for the Lord. This goat is then brought before the high priest, and the high priest slays this goat on the behalf of the nation. So really what we have at work here is two different substitutionary ideas, two substitutionary concepts that are being communicated. You have Azazel, which is overtly bearing the sins of the nation, carried away. And then you have the sacrifice of the goat, which is, quote, for the Lord, and it is being sacrificed in the stead of the people, and it's being offered as an atonement for sin. You know, it's really, really fascinating to me, ladies and gentlemen. You read some of the scholarly literature, and I read a lot of it every day, but you read the scholarly literature and you actually have you have scholars denying that Christ's sacrifice was substitutionary. They argue, well, it was on the behalf of the people, but not in the place of, not instead of. Well, let's see here. Paul makes a point of saying, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 5 and 6, Christ is our Passover. Now, here you have type and antitype very clearly being set forth, undeniably, unequivocally. So what happened on the night of the Passover? If you were an Israelite, or even if you were a believing Egyptian, by the way, you would take a Passover lamb, you would slay it, and you would take the blood of that sacrifice and sprinkle it on the mantle of your door, on the lintel of your door. And the Lord said, when I see the blood, I will pass over. I will not slay the firstborn. Okay? So the lamb, the Passover lamb, served as a substitute for the life of the firstborn child, firstborn son in the household of those believing sufficiently and who offered the sacrifice. Passover lamb being slain instead of the firstborn. If that's not substitutionary, I don't know what is. So when Paul says Christ is our Passover, then how do we exclude substitution? We come to Yom Kippur. Christ is the sacrifice. Well, why was the goat offered, that goat for the Lord? Why was it offered? It was being offered in the place of the nation. And just like Azazel was sent into the wilderness bearing the sins of the nation instead of the nation bearing the sins. Substitution. But most importantly, in regard to the death, is that the sacrifice of the goat for the Lord was an atonement that was offered not only on the behalf of, but in the place of the people. You simply cannot deny the substitutionary nature of Yom Kippur, whether it be Azazel or whether it be the goat for the Lord. They are both serving a substitutionary sacrificial aspect. Now, personally, I don't know why anyone would actually want to deny the substitutionary death of Christ, except there was a fad in scholarship some years ago that said, we don't want to talk about the blood of Christ. That's abhorrent. That's shocking. That offends the sensibilities. Well, it might offend your sensibility, but that doesn't mean the doctrine is wrong to speak of the substitutionary death of Christ. Just, a classic example of scholars trying to think up something that's so kind of off the wall and to be known for innovating. Christ is our Passover, substitutionary death. Christ was the atonement sacrifice of Yom Kippur, substitutionary. And if you want to talk about Azazel, I'm going to do this very, very quickly. There are some who have suggested, and it's really fascinating. When Jesus was on trial, Pilate said, "I find no fault with this man." Well, guess what? Here's Jesus, in whom is no fault at all. And you have a goat in which there is no fault. There's no blemish. Okay? I find no fault with this man. And the crowd, away with him, crucify him. And in desperation, Pilate said, well, tell you what, at this time of the year, it's customary that a prisoner be let go. There is one named Barabbas here who is a rebel. He's a rabble rouser. He is a rebel. He is a criminal. So take your choice. Jesus or Barabbas. Now, Barabbas is a dangerous guy. And the crowd said, release Barabbas. So guess what? Barabbas has been termed by a lot of people as Azazel, because he is bearing sins. He is a sinner. And he's turned free, instead of, like the Mishnah suggesting, thrown off a cliff. Give me your thoughts on that. And some people say, well, there's no way in the world that you can make Barabbas to be an atonement. Well, Azazel was part of the atonement process, and he had the sins of the whole nation laid on his shoulders or on his head. Why not Barabbas? I don't know. I'm unsettled on this, all right? And I don't like to be that way. I like answers. I like to be able to say, here's exactly what I believe on this. But this is one of those really fascinating areas about which we don't have a tremendous amount of detail. We're not given anything other than the gospel record of Barabbas being released. It seems highly suggestive that he was serving as Azazel. All right? Okay, that's all for today. Thank you so very, very much. And don't forget, won't be with you on Friday. I'm going to be in Jonesboro, Arkansas at the conference. Mike and I will not be with you Friday. He's speaking at the conference as well. So, Lord willing, we'll see you next week.